Oh, hi everyone. Good evening and welcome to the Labrador West Speaker Series. And this is a collaboration of the Labrador Institute and the Labrador Heritage Society, the local branch here, the Height of Land branch. So welcome to those in the room and also those that are on live stream through our Labrador Institute Facebook page. We also have a group in College of North Atlantic in Happy Valley Goose Bay gathered like we are here to watch the live stream, so that's great. Anyway, many thanks go out to College of North Atlantic, both campuses, Labrador West and Happy Valley Goose Bay, for the use of their facilities in both locations. The college administration and staff have always been very supportive of our initiatives in both locations. And also thanks to Lab West computer support person Alana for joining us this evening to help on the tech ends of things. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get going. Bathrooms are located through the double doors to your left and then to your right. Exits in case of an emergency are just past the bathrooms to your left, and if you go to the right there'll be more exits the other way to the back and to the far end. Also at this time, please silence your cell phones and refrain from using the Wi-Fi so we can maintain a strong signal for our live streaming. Without further ado, we'll get started and with tonight's presentation. Our presenter, Jordan Brown, is a resident of Labrador City. He is actually the president of the local Labrador Heritage Society, Height of Land branch, and he's also a recent recipient of a Labradorian of Distinction Award, and he's very passionate about all things to do with Labrador. He spent endless hours researching, reading, and learning about the new Labrador Party. He is very excited to share Labradorian for Labrador with you this evening. Please join me in welcoming Jordan.
Thank you everyone for coming, and thanks for having me. I'd like to thank CNA for having me here for the use of their room, and the Labrador Institute for helping co-host this, and also thank everyone for showing up and everyone out there. This evening I'm going to be talking about the new Labrador Party, but in particular Tom Burgess and Michael Martin. There were so many people involved in the whole party as a whole, organizers, volunteers, and so on, and the candidates who ran in the districts. But I'm going to focus on these two gentlemen because they both sat in the House, and so therefore they got the media's attention, they got the attention of countless people that way, and therefore they left a larger mark that's more noticeable, and that I like to focus on because the use of media too, especially back then, was really interesting, right? So there were so many different newspapers, more newspapers back then there was today, and more journalists than there is today. So every little bit of story got out there, and that's why I'm going to focus primarily on these two gentlemen. So let's get started. So in the year was 1966. This was Labrador West's actual second election, per se, that we only became a district in 1962. And at that time, we had an independent win, so much to Joey's unhappiness, an independent got in, so not one of Joey's parachute candidates. So Joey didn't want that to happen again, so he was trying to find somebody to run in this district that would be a liberal, and that he could kind of keep his control, which he was famous for, really. So at that time, he was looking around Labrador West looking for a candidate, and like you said, they always had the parachute candidates, right? Earl Windsor, well, he wasn't a boat. So you had Earl Windsor and G.I. Hill, both not residents of Labrador, both did not live in Labrador. They were Joey's little parachute candidates. And Earl Windsor was a ship captain, but also he was the heir to his family's shipping company, so therefore a merchant. And G.I. Hill was a insurance salesman, but he was also a very famous insurance salesman because he made himself a millionaire at it. And they both were in Joey's cabinet. And G.I. Hill was actually a minister with a portfolio, so he sat in the cabinet but didn't really hold any title for a department. So these two people, like I said, they just show up on election around the election time, shake a few hands and disappear, and they've been gone for 3 years. And it was a systematic thing right from the beginning, and people were noticing. And it didn't work in Labrador West when the district was created. Like I said, an independent, Charlie Devine, won, so Joey didn't want that to happen again. So you want to see, Joey wanted it all red. This is how it would look before the election, and Joey wanted it all red. So therefore, he decided to court this man, Tom Burgess. So Tom was approached by every political party up to this point. He was approached by the Liberals to run. He was approached by the NDP to run, and he was approached by the PCs. Now, Tom, after meeting with all these people, he ended up going to Corner Brook to meet Joey in person to discuss running. And at that time, Joey promised him the world, promised him eventually a cabinet position, and, oh, you want that road, we'll get that road. And he promised him the world, so Tom decided to take it and go run for the Liberals. And at that time, Charlie accepted an invitation to cross the floor from being an independent to run for the PC party. So, but it didn't go as planned, and the election happened, and Tom won in 1966. But something funny happened in 1968.
Statement under 32 remains, first of all, in this House of Assembly, by the Honourable the Premier, when he said that he would rather lose Labrador than spend 1 cent towards building a road to the border. And then again, at a meeting in Happy Valley, when the statement was said over and over again, we will not spend any money to build a road to the border, to the Quebec border.
So, in 1968, around Christmas time, Tom left the Liberal Party and sat as an independent in the House. And that was a clip from his first House floor sitting after that in 1969. He spoke in the House as an independent after the budget, the throne speech. Tom was born in Ireland, moved here in the 1950s, and he was a union organizer and eventually the union president in the region for the USW. He was a very charismatic, outspoken person. He had a lot of ability to he was a people person. He was able to speak very well. He was a very good person, a little bit better than me. And anyway, so he got really fed up sitting in the backbench. Every proposal he put forward was shot down. Every attempt he made to get something for Labrador West or Labrador as a whole was shot down. And he got very frustrated with it. And he just decided, well, I'm going to leave. And when he realized he drew a lot of media attention. And it worked in his favor. By using the media, he was able to make his point across. And, you know, like, Burgess intends action by fair or foul means. Burgess says JRS is ill-informed. So he used the media to kind of start poking holes in the Smallwood administration. And for someone to, get up and just leave the party and not cross the floor into the PCs, it was an anomaly almost. And by pointing out that Labrador West, or Labrador as a whole, needed so much stuff, it got a lot of attention.
If I could get out of it gracefully, I'd get out of it. But now that I'm in, I'm going to do the job that I was elected for, by fair or foul means. And that is to ensure that the people of my district at least get recognition.
So, and by using this language and stuff, it kind of built up on the whole movement. And this is where he starts building the brand for a movement, a brand to start a Labrador movement. And that's like, he wasn't backing down on it. He had it in a vision, and he was going to go for it. And it worked in his favor, because he starts building up this thing. And it started off as what they call the Labrador Rights Party. at first, but it eventually evolved into an identity of the new Labrador Party. And it was the idea was getting an identity for Labrador. And at this time, Labrador was not very well connected. You know, people in the north and people in the south coasts, they knew each other was there, but there was no communication means, real proper communication means. And to get in and out of these communities, especially in wintertime or bad weather or anything like that, you're not getting in there. But with Burgess coming on the scene and speaking to other Labradorians and his ability to travel around Labrador more efficiently, he was able to network. So in 1969, he started, you know, I'm going to form a new party. He's going to contest all the seats in Labrador. And the idea was to actually put Labrador on the map in our own province. And to the shock of the Smallwood administration and everyone like that, it kind of got him really running. And it kind of got them all going, what are we going to do? We got this guy here who left the party. He knows everything about some of the inner workings of the party, and now he's going to form his own party to run against us and take away our safe seats. And you know, it pokes holes in the Smallwood administration. It poked a lot of holes, and it got a lot of people scared. And even on the opposite side, the PCs, who wanted to run candidates in the region too, realizing, well, you know, this is a Labrador movement. They're going to start running their own people. So Burgess takes this time now, after leaving the party, starting to organize his own party. He starts traveling with Labradorians and starts going around the province. And you know, he went to the north coast and south coast, and the things he found, he couldn't believe. Like in a modern, the modern time of then, that people, you know, they never had any running water. They didn't have roads. They didn't have proper harbor facilities. They never had airstrips. No services. In some cases, he went to communities, and the government provided diesel generators, but they weren't even hooked up. They were never turned on or never properly hooked up, and they sat just on the side of a dock, rusting out. And some people didn't even realize that they actually lived this way. They thought this was normal even outside of their own community. So it was very shock. Unemployment was a really big thing too, he noticed. A lot of people were unemployed. A lot of people weren't working. And they were frustrated. They were angry. And, you know, they're wondering, like, what could they do about it? Well, on this tour, Tom managed to bring them an idea. Start running your own people. Get yourselves elected to get in there and try to make change. So, in the 1970s, the party was formed. They had an executive in all three districts, Labrador North, Labrador South, and Labrador West. And they begin to start organizing and getting the message out there. The election wasn't still for another year away, so they had a year of going around, like actual campaigning and organizing the party, and they were signing up hundreds of people. They were signing up people that normally wouldn't sign up for a political party or wouldn't engage in a political party, and this was kind of a first for Labrador itself too. They'd never seen this like before. They just expected, you know, once a year someone would show up, tell them who to vote for, and then disappear again for 3 years and never hear from them again. So now they actually have someone who's promising them, well, we're going to get in there and we're going to change this, we're going to make them accountable. Because as a party, they couldn't win a government. There's only 3 seats. But they could actually be a loud voice, you know, the squeaky wheel in the room. And that was their plan. And there was a lot of organization. There was a lot of on-the-ground people. There was a lot put into it. And the Liberals and PCs didn't know what to do about it. They never actually had to campaign in Labrador before. And it you know, it shook their boots kind of thing. And it was a different time for them too. Things started changing, and a Labrador identity started to come about. It was always there, but it started to come out, and people started realizing, well, I'm Labradorian. You're Labradorian, North Coast, South Coast, West, right? So it was an interesting time for that.
But I didn't get anything done for my district. There was reference made in this Honourable House of Assembly. It has been made on 2 or 3 different occasions. In this session alone. Then why is it time after time after time. It's a good question.
And the point was made, like, how are these people keep getting elected? How are people that clearly are not in their district, not doing what they were elected to do in Labrador, how are these people constantly getting elected? How are they constantly getting in the House? And it was a really good question. And a lot of it was, by not changing things, they stay the status quo. And now that they're actually changing the system and changing how people perceive the system, it was a big stirring and a big plot. And a lot of it too, especially with the mega projects in Labrador, also, because it brought about employment. And by bringing about employment, one person gets hired and another person is not getting hired, then they start questioning the system, especially when it comes to Churchill Falls. Another thing that Tom would bring up was how Labradorians weren't getting hired in Churchill Falls. And the project was in their backyard. And it was a legitimate question that even today we asked that same question. But he brought it to the forefront, and then people started realizing things got to change. He points out that there's so much dissatisfaction, and it's starting to come to the surface, and people are showing their dissatisfaction now. So in 1971, the election coming away, and I just thought this was an interesting point. Tom goes to a conference in St. John's, and there's federal ministers there and stuff, and he pointed out that warm underwear does more for Labrador than the DREE program did. And it kind of proved a point that Labrador was forgotten. Labrador was just a back burner issue that eventually we'll get to. And even for the people from Ottawa, it kind of made them think, because at the time, Labrador was not its own district that we know it today. There was no federal riding for Labrador. We were part of the Northern Peninsula right on down to White Bay. And the New Labrador Party brought that up too. And it was a part of their whole campaign that they would lobby to have that change. Because even the federal government at some level was ignoring Labrador and Labradorian issues. So now you have all these people in this region, Labrador, and you had so many thousand members of the New Labrador Party registered now. They had this huge base of people that rallying behind them. And all these people are, like all the federal and provincial people are going, what do we do? Like, this is coming on so fast and so quick. This is in 3 years, they've mobilized, 2.5 years at this point. They mobilized so many people, got so many members, got so many people together to vent their frustration. And Joey, he wasn't a fan of all this. And as you're seeing in the video clip now, he wasn't a big fan of this. And he makes his comments quite known. At the beginning, he talks about students. And he talks about how they're a part of the election campaign, but they're, it's an after issue. They're not a part of the election. And at the funny thing, and a moment before this clip that I kind of had to cut it out though, he just got booed off stage at Memorial University. So, but he still has nice things to say about the students, but not about the New Labrador Party.
I'm very proud of them. I'm very hopeful about them. I see the future of this province written in their faces. What I see is good, very encouraging, very reassuring.
You feel that they have an important role to play in this forthcoming election?
They have a role, yes. I don't think that the role of our younger generation is necessarily performed in an election. I think it's performed in just about every aspect of our Newfoundland life, including the election. But I think it will be played much more out of the election than in.
What explains the development of a party like the Labrador Party at this particular time?
Pure, unadulterated, undiluted, 100% careerism and opportunism. No principle, no philosophy, just sheer, unadulterated personal careerism.
And it's interesting that Joey would say that. One can almost say his tenure as premier was careerism and whatnot, but it's a point because him and Tom almost butted heads from the beginning, really. They're both charismatic speakers, they're both very good public speakers, and they both had kind of a sense of pride in their region that they were fighting for. Joey, if you look at, especially leading up to Confederation, Joey was about the Newfoundland people, the rural people, that, you know, and the baby bonus and all that, right? And so he fought for, you know, his island. And you can almost say the same for Tom. Tom was fighting for Labrador, a region that was also very poor, needed services, and needed some attention from a government official or a government body. And it almost like they butted heads because the two weren't really compatible at that sense. They weren't working together for the same goal. They were working together against each other because he was, it's almost in Joey's mind, it was still like you had to get what he could for his people back home. And I think that's the biggest part of the clash. Two similar people butting heads in that sense of it. I don't know how Joey's career ended, so it never really, you know, comes full circle.
And why do you wish to form or establish a new political entity by the name of the New Labrador Party? And I want to make it perfectly clear that we are not, as a party executive, for myself and knowing the thoughts of our membership, we are not anti-liberal, we are not anti-conservative, but one thing that we are positively, we are pro-Labrador. Now, what has Labrador contributed to the progress and welfare of this province? In Labrador West, the area that we're sitting in here tonight, for instance, the district of Labrador West, in terms of contributory revenue, we have contributed 25% of all revenues that have accrued to the province over the past 5 or 10 years.
And as you see, Tom is, like I said, he's a very good, well-spoken person, a very charismatic person, and he brought up a lot of good points in the sense that worked for him. Especially he played on the line, what goes out of Labrador doesn't come back into Labrador. And that juncture, it is true, and at that point it was very true, in the sense that Labrador never had a proper road out of here. Most of the coasts were in pure poverty. They never had any airstrips or proper harbors or electricity of any sort. Lack of telephone communication. Actually, at one point, I believe, one of the big things they had was they even had a lack of television and proper radio. So a lot of people who were living in Labrador, realizing that, well, I work in this mine, and I make X amount of dollars, and the mine makes X amount of revenue and X amount of royalties for the province. Why can't I get on a plane and leave here? Or why can't I drive on a road out of here? And when I bring up the topic, it's shot down, and to the point where it's saying, I'd rather sell Labrador than build a road. So it was a lot of emotion, a lot of feeling into it, and that it was at a breaking point. And this is where the breaking point came in. It was in the 1971 election. And like I said, the government officials, everything at the time, they were frightened because they realized that they'd done wrong and they don't have any way to fix it. And that way we got to this point here. And seeing as Tom is the only resident at this point running in the election, that he almost knows that was what's on the ground, and the Liberals didn't. So when the actual nominations came in 1971, there was a bit of a change. They moved Earl Windsor from Labrador North, and he ran in Fogo Island, which was his area, around Bonavista North, that area. And they placed Mel Woodward in this election. So this is kind of where the Liberals come back around and realize in order for them to win that district, they had to place someone who lived in the district. And Mel Woodward lived in Happy Valley Goose Bay. So it changed things up a bit in the election too at that point. And the new Labrador Party was running a candidate, Herb Brett, a longtime resident of the region too. So they had to get on the offensive then, because two residents were actually going to run against each other. And here's the campaign trail for Mr. Brett. And if you notice some of the names here, if anyone's really familiar with Labrador in that way, Winston White. Winston White was the fellow who actually coined the term the big land. He was a CBC broadcaster, and he actually as well was a recent recipient posthumously of the Labradorians of Distinction Award. And you have Herb Brett, the candidate here, and Hank Schaus, another longtime resident and former mayor of Happy Valley Goose Bay, and also a recipient of the Labradorian Distinction Award. And Herb Brett is also credited with some work for bringing the Trans-Labrador Highway through and the Northwest River cable car, bringing it into the community. So the people that are actually running and backing these campaigns were local residents and very prominent in the community, very volunteer-based people, and they were your neighbors, they were your next-door neighbors, everything like this. So all these people are gathered together for a cause based out of the region, and it was something that was really new to Labrador at the time too, campaigning and all that, because it wasn't really as big as because a Liberal showed up and a Liberal won. Now you actually have a competitive campaign in the region. So this was new in that, right? So after the election in 1971, as you can see, Tom won by quite a landslide. But unfortunately, in Labrador South and Labrador North, it didn't work out so well. They did amazing results for a up-and-coming party, and they were almost, like I said, even in Labrador South, it was virtually almost a tie. So this was, for the outside parties, this was something phenomenal. This was something that they couldn't believe that would happen again. And especially for the Liberals losing there, but they kind of knew that was going to happen. But the close ties in Labrador South and Labrador North did put them on edge in that sense. And here we have a breakdown of the votes. The new Labrador Party actually won the popular vote in Labrador, 45%, and the Liberals come in at 34%, and the PC's at 20%, and an NDP candidate got 1% of the vote. And for this, they realized that there was a changing dynamic in the region, and another fear that started popping up was separatism, and that was a very worrisome thing as well for that. And it brought like a lot of thought to it. So they started realizing that they needed to focus more on all of their campaigns as a whole as well. But that election also come with its own bag of interesting tricks. It was a hung parliament, and Tom Burgess ended up being the only third-party candidate in the House, so he was the balance of power. And by holding the balance of power, he had to choose somebody. If not, there'd be a new election. So the thing was, the two gentlemen here had to find a way to get them on their side. So the negotiations started. In order to form government, they needed Tom, because which way Tom went is which way a government was formed. Do you go back to your old boss? Do you come to the new boss? And that. So with the Conservatives, he tried to negotiate this. He wanted a cabinet position. He wanted a road through Labrador and on to Quebec. And he wanted a commission to look at Labrador as a whole and like all the issues and problems that Labrador was facing, from poverty to lack of communication to lack of transportation. And these were the party's demands. Also on top of the list was a fourth seat for Labrador. And the same demands also went to the Smallwood administration. At the time, Frank Morris would not agree to a cabinet position. He agreed to look at the issues of Labrador, and he agreed to talk about a 4th seat in Labrador. Smallwood took a different approach. He promised them the world, and he promised that, not a cabinet position, but that when he retires, that he'd back him to be the leader of the Liberal Party. So, pretty, not sweet deal almost. But it was a back and forth. So, stuck between a rock and a hard place, he did come out and initially and said that he would support the Conservatives when the House would open. But after some discussion, after a vacation, he come back and changed his mind because he ran into Joey Smallwood in Florida, and they had another discussion about it all. And he come back and he changed his mind and said he would support the Smallwood administration. This led to a huge uproar in the media. It caused a lot of confusion in the media, and it got to the point where no one knew where Tom was going to go. But he did, while he was doing all that, a few people resigned from the Liberal government and crossed into his independence. Therefore, it collapsed the whole government, it collapsed the whole system and created a hung parliament. Therefore, another election was called. But doing so, Tom ended up burning his bridges with the New Labrador Party because he did not support his idea of supporting the Liberals, so therefore he got booted from the New Labrador Party. He burned his bridges with Frank Morris by backstabbing him and going back to the Liberals. So the only place he had left to go was back to the Liberal Party. And so therefore, after resigning from the New Labrador Party and putting in a new leader, he ended up running that. And in amongst all that, Joey Smallwood did decide to resign as Premier of the province. So it created an interesting situation that actually brought down the Smallwood administration. And therefore, just like a small part of this confusion, everything like that, brought about a different identity for Labrador. It brought about a different perspective on how Labradorians view government, views elections, and views political parties. Because we realized about the beauty of communication and how to use communication, how to use the media and all that, because before all this, we never had any of that. And it was an interesting situation there. This is an interesting thing that everyone always wondered about. And there's only one place I've actually found anything to do with that. And it was in a thesis written by Adam Spark in an interview that he had with Andrew Crosby, that John C. Doyle did visit Tom Burgess, apparently with his allegedly suitcase full of money, and Tom refused it. And there's only one source, one thing, so we can only speculate, because unfortunately everyone involved with that is now deceased. But you look at the motives for John C. Doyle. John C. Doyle was a wealthy landowner, resource owner, Wabash Mines and timber resources in Lake Melville and that. But he was also protected by the Smallwood administration. He had a lot of dealings with the Smallwood administration. And if Joey lost, all the fingers from the NPC parties that have been pointed at him over the years would actually come a little closer than just pointing. And John C. Doyle was later charged with over 400 counts of fraud in 1972 and 73. He disappeared to Panama, and he died in 2000 in Panama, outside of the jurisdiction of the Canadian government. So this is just another step in the whole system, because with John C. Doyle, he owned massive swaths of Labrador resources, and it was a huge sticking point for people of Labrador, especially in the Lake Melville region, where he backed out of a promise to build a mill, and built it in Stephenville, and even that mill eventually closed within a short number of years, and went bankrupt, actually, and closed. And large swaths of Labrador forests were taken and brought to Stephenville for jobs out there. So it was an interesting system that kind of just proves the point that Labradorians were not happy with the system. They weren't because these things were happening to them. Lack of jobs, taking of resources. And anyone like to use the washroom or take a break or so on and so forth? It's time to do so.
And there's coffee and some light snacks in the lobby. Help yourself.
Ready? Okay. Anyway, welcome back. Everyone's good? Everyone back? Perfect. As we continue on there now, with Tom leaving the party, and that for his decision to support Joey, and eventually causing a second election almost within the same year, the new Labrador Party appointed Michael Martin as to be the next leader. Michael Martin represented, well, at this time he didn't represent, but he ran for the Labrador South District. He was born in Cartwright. He had a really different personality than Tom. Mike was a lot more soft-spoken of it. He was more of a person that was more of a people person. He wasn't a politician, and that was the thing about him. He actually kind of despised politics, and he more or less ran and everything out of spite. Of actually growing up on the coast of Labrador and witnessing everything that Tom was talking about that he only saw from visiting, Mike grew up with. And so with that, he wanted to make a difference for his own people. And so he ran out of spite, pure spite, that he was going to go in there and he was going to tell it like it was in that way. He had a different approach to everything too. He was more, he explained things more. He was going to tell you differently. That he wasn't going to say he was going to change the world, but he wouldn't promise it to you, but he said he will try his best, kind of way of speaking. And with Mike being leader of the party now, the Labrador identity really comes out, because they started using the slogan, "Our own man." Mike was born in Labrador. Mike was a Labradorian. And so the aspect was, when you're voting for Mike Martin, you're voting for a Labradorian to be in the House. And it was a big deal for them, because he was the first. He was the first Labradorian-born Labradorian to run and to try to get into the House of Assembly. And this even predates Confederation. No Labradorian has ever sat as an MHA in this province up to this point. And that was a huge deal. And that's where the whole identity thing comes out. A Labradorian, our own man, and that's how it worked. So the second election, the re-election, comes about. And at this point, Tom was running as a Liberal in Labrador West, and he comes second. The new Labrador Party candidate barely pulls out 438 votes. It was a huge thing, but people in Labrador West felt betrayed. They felt betrayed from the new Labrador Party and from Tom. So that's why Rousseau called it a 3,400, almost identical what Tom got in the last election. They all went to the PCs. In Labrador North, Mel Woodward reclaimed a seat, and Mel Woodward wasn't Labradorian born, but he was a resident of Happy Valley Goose Bay. And that was interesting for the Liberals, because this is the first time they'd done this. This is the first time they put a Labrador resident, other than Tom, in a different district. Like this is, Labrador North got their resident. He may have been Liberal, but they got their resident. And Herb Brett did very well as well in there, and he was the same thing, but Herb Brett and them, right? So this was the idea. The whole dynamic has changed at this point. You can't have a parachute candidate in Labrador anymore. It's not going to work. And this is where this election proved this point. Now in Labrador South, Mike and his opponent in the Liberal Party were almost a virtual political tie. One vote, officially. The papers come out to say 3 votes, but the results and once everything was said and done, it was literally 1 vote. And at this point, technically, the Liberals won. But the House refuses to seat the candidate. And at this point, Mike Martin applies to have a recount. And also, through this course, they discover a lot of problems in the voting process on the coast of Labrador. And so it goes before the courts. And the courts, for a while, take a little while, and at this point, they say there has to be a by-election. This candidate cannot be seated. Let's do this again. It was a problem with proxy voting. People voting for other people without their proper, identification or due care and process. So they have to have another election. So for Mike, this is excruciating. This is 3 elections. He's not a politician, and he doesn't see himself as a politician. But now he has to go through 3 full elections in, I think, 18 months or 17 months or something like that. So it's a massive amount of time. And if you look at the actual breakdown of votes in Labrador, the PCs is pulled out as a popular vote. And unfortunately, the New Labrador Party did take a beat. They went from being almost less than a year ago to now going from the most popular vote in Labrador to the 3rd most popular vote in Labrador. And it's very unfortunate at this point, but as Frank Moore's popularity grew, it also did reflect in the votes in Labrador. But for Labrador West, Tom is out. He came 2nd, which even for the Liberals was surprising. But he did get shut out by Joseph Rousseau, a teacher from Wabush. After this, the story of Tom vanishes. And even in a document I received from the House about his keeping tabs on him, I guess for pension reasons or many reasons, they say whereabouts unknown, last known, Ireland. And it's unfortunate that it went that way. Yes, Labradorians at some point, at that point in time, felt betrayed. They felt that they backed something that kind of stabbed them in the back itself. And it's unfortunate, because what he done for Labrador, and he kind of like took Labrador out of a shell and said, you don't have to be like this. You can change, you can be more engaged, you can be more active, you can, you have a voice, use it. And without that, we would never really know how things would have went without what he did. Because the actions before the whole 71 election, you can never be repaid. It was a massive gift almost to the people that, you don't have to live like this, and you don't have to accept it. And hindsight, is always 20/20. And so, looking back though, it was a gift, but unfortunately things went this awry. But and it's too bad that he did disappear and never came back to Labrador, because I think at this point in time things could have been forgiven, and I believe so from my research and from everything I've learned, that it didn't go as planned, and it didn't turn out as people wished. But thankfully, we have a different system here in Labrador now. We look at politics differently here in Labrador, and like you said, in Labrador you can't run a parachute candidate anymore. You have to have some Labrador roots to run in any election here, and it's been proven time after time after time. And now Labrador runs through the heart of everything we do, politically and culturally. We're very proud up to this point now. We're a very proud people. And as I said, Joseph Rasu, I can't pronounce his name right. Rousseau, he was a resident of Wabash. And the PCs at this point learned that you need to run a Labrador resident at least to get a seat. So here we have election number 3 for poor old Mike Martin. Out of the votes, they had to seek a recount, and so he has to do this all over again. And like I said, the margins are so narrow. Thankfully, the PCs decided to run a candidate in the district now. So now it's instead of a 2-way race, it becomes a 3-way race. And so it frees up a little bit more space for him to work and try to get those votes that he needed to get in. And he does. They only get 132 votes. But he manages to get 1,057 votes out of it. So what happened was the PCs took away from the Liberals, and Mike managed to keep and retain a lot of his votes. And it's good, because now he can be seated. This district can be seated, and now Mike can be seated in the House that's already sitting at this point. And so we got a lot of catch-up up to do. But it also leads to this. Labrador's first Labradorian, basically. He's the first Labrador-born MHA, pre-Confederation and post-Confederation, because we were never included. And this is a massive point. We're up into the 70s now, and Labradorians weren't really included in government. It's a huge deal for Labrador. It's a huge win for Labrador and for Labrador politics. And it changes the dynamic of everything from this point forward, going forward to this day. So, the party manages to hold itself together, with Tom leaving as leader, and now Mike coming in, not as charismatic and a different approach to being a leader, and not really considering himself a politician. The party actually managed to hold itself together fairly well and continue to do work and continue to promote Labrador, and that was the big thing at this point. They were promoting Labrador and its needs, and what the people need, and its identity, and the Labradorian identity. So in 1973, Martin avoids useless votes. Being the third party, he did not want to get caught up in the squabbles between the PCs and the Liberals, and a lot of the partisan stuff that went on between the two of them. So basically, if they were fighting amongst each other, and about partisan issues, Mike would get up and excuse himself out of the House, and he would not vote on any issue that did with that. He would only vote on things of budget, things that affected Labrador directly, and things that moved government forward. But he would not get caught up in the partisanship of it. Not being the way that he is, not really, he didn't consider himself a politician at that point. So this continues on. We get to 1974. At this point, Mike gets a movement on one of the key issues that Labradorians had at the time, a 4th seat for Labrador. And the way that they looked at it was splitting Labrador North into what we know today as Thorn Gap Mountains, Upper Lake Melville. So Mike presents the position from Labradorians in the House. And he actually gets another party in the House to support. Now it's in the opposition party, which is down the Liberals, but Melwood also rose and support the petition. It shows that Labradorians supporting other Labradorians in the House. Joseph was on the government side, so not publicly, he probably got the support, but behind closed doors for sure. But this is just showing that how things kept revolving in the House. Now you have residents of Labrador in the House working together. The system has changed already. The system is moving differently than it did before, and Labrador issues are getting through the House. So it's very significant. March 31st, 1974. Big day for Labradorians. It's Labrador Flag Day. The Labrador flag was the brainchild of Mike Martin, his wife Pat, and Labrador University students, Memorial of University students. 1974, and that day, March 31st, 1974, was the 25th anniversary of Confederation with Canada. And at the time, the government was, in 1973, they started handing out, ideas like, do something for Confederation. Support our identity as, Newfoundland and Labrador. Well, actually, it was only the province of Newfoundland at that point. But, so Mike and them did this. The province never had a flag. Joey, in the government's previous, just used the Union Jack as the flag of Labrador. And for a lot of people, it's already used. It's someone else's, it's another country's flag. It's not really much of identity. So, and Mike being Mike in the sense that, let's poke the bear a little bit here. Let's design a flag for Labrador and just prove that, we have an identity. We are different, we're a unique people. And this is how it worked out. Now, Mike had to use the students from Memorial University to present the flag, because if not, it would never got accepted as the way it did. Because it would be seen as a new Labrador Party project. But the party built on this idea already, right from 1966 and onwards. They built on the idea of Labrador identity. And this was the final key to Labrador identity. A unifying object that you unite around. It was accepted instantaneously. I believe Mike said one time, in the first year alone, 1,000 flags were sold. It was accepted as a thing, and it unified us. And to this very day, it's a key part of our Labrador identity. And it was a turning point for us as well. And it was a turning point that was brought by the new Labrador Party. But unfortunately, the dream is over. In 1975, Mike Martin had to resign. Not for any political reason of such, but because of financial. Being a third-party member of the House Assembly doesn't pay very well. There's no bonuses given to them for being a committee member or being a parliamentary secretary or being any part of that, because they had nothing. They couldn't sit on nothing. And running 3 elections in 18 months doesn't also help financially. So he had to quit, unfortunately, and he made a bit of a political statement with it. That how can an MHA do his job in such a rural, remote area, with no airstrips, no proper harbor facilities, no proper communication, some places no electricity? How can they do their job? How can he be an MHA for these people without special assistance, without a helping hand so he can go and represent a people of a district of an area? It should not be about partisanship, but it was clearly about partisanship. And so, with no money, barely any pay, he had no choice but to quit. If not, he would have claimed personal ruin. And unfortunately, at this point, the party went with him, in a sense. It stuck around for a while in the background, but it never ever ran another candidate again. Not under the new Labrador Party banner. But the work that they've done from the party's founding to this point is phenomenal. It built on what we have today. And like I said in the lobby there, and I'll say it here now, it runs in the background of Labrador society. It sparked interest in people from all political walks. It inspired people to be Labradorian. It inspired people to say, well, this is my home, this is how I feel it should be. And it was a good thing, because there's nothing wrong with a sense of home, a sense of region, a sense of, this is where I'm from, and this is how I feel about issues. And it made Labradorians more outspoken, more critical about decisions made, and it also got them more engaged. From this point on, most people who were a member of the party or people who volunteer with the party, the names on some of the lists there are massive community people who got out and did all kinds of great and amazing community things. Some of them were only recently recipients of the Labradorians of Distinction Awards. But they all built on the idea of Labrador identity, and without it, I don't think we'd have the Labrador we have today. And so these few events over a span of 6-7 years live with us for a lifetime now. We're almost 50 years in, and the things that happened here are still relevant to this very day. In the post-New Labrador Party, the Royal Commission on Labrador, in 1975, it was released to the public. It was one of the promises made by the Frank Morris government to Tom Burgess, actually, when he first negotiated to support them. The Royal Commission on Labrador would examine every aspect of Labrador and basically find all the deep issues that really needed to be resolved. And we go back to that later on, and then the Labrador Development Council, they were a protest group that was formed to protest lumber rights and mineral rights and stuff in Labrador, and it was the first of its kind. It got out there, and people got together in a committee and started criticizing decisions made by the government and offer solutions to those issues, which was great because before that there was nothing really like that before. The Combined Councils of Labrador, all the municipalities in Labrador getting together and lobbying government for water, sewer, roads, infrastructure. And to this very day they still operate, and they still operate similarly to they did back then. And they're a key part of Labrador municipal politics. Labrador Heritage Society, brainchild of a lot of very passionate historians and Labradorians. The idea was to keep Labrador's history and preserve it and promote it and keep it in Labrador for future generations. And it worked. It's still, except we're here in Labrador West, they're still over there in Upper Lake Millville. And even from that, we had them days. All the oral history of Labrador brought together so all Labradorians can read it and remember and preserve it, because at this point, a lot of the Labrador stories were getting lost, but it's also part of identity. The Federal District of Labrador, for that, it was a thing that they lobbied for many years. It was a new Labrador Party objective, and even in, I've recently found a document of where the Labrador Heritage Society wrote about the importance of a Labrador district for identity reasons and for cultural reasons. And eventually, we have to this very day. We have the District of Labrador, which is a part of Labrador identity to this day. So a little bit of advice from the past.
So I'm sitting in this house and I intend to ensure that Labrador gets the recognition that it so rightfully deserves. I will do everything in my power to ensure that this identity, with subsequent action, will come about. And if, as I have said earlier, if my word is not to be taken relative to what I feel are the problems, well then get your committees going and find out, because somewhere in the near future I can hear it being said, now where do we go wrong as far as Labrador is concerned?
Tom in the House, this was in 1970 when this was recorded. Tom basically almost foreshadowed what would happen before it even happened, which was, I find, quite interesting. Because the part about identity, and he was it was even in some of his media releases and things like that, he always brought the word Labrador identity. The Labrador identity he probably thought of and what we have today may be different, but it still is relevant. Especially the part about getting your communities and stuff together. Eventually, the Royal Commission on Labrador did find the problems of Labrador, and the question of where did we go wrong was actually answered, well, tried to be answered in that report. So even back then they knew that there was issues and that they had to be addressed immediately. The Commission recommended the Trans-Labrador Highway, the link to Route 389, a Trans-Labrador Railroad, that one never ever got done, community diesel generators for communities, community docks and airstrips, microwave towers, and the list goes on and on, because there was just so much stuff in that report. But none of this stuff would have really come to the forefront as fast as it did without the New Labrador Party. Without them poking holes in government's decision making and their spending and their allocation of resources, none of this would have ever happened. You have to give them the credit for that, because no one knew until people started going to these communities and saying, why don't you have this? Where is this? This community on the island has this. And it really poked a lot of holes in the small administration, especially that aspect of it, especially with mega projects on their doorstep. But these things now eventually got addressed. Now there's still so much stuff in that report that never ever did get addressed. But it was a step forward, and today we are more vocal about our issues. We're more outspoken about our issues. So we can continue to lobby for the things that we need as a region. And out of the identity and Mike Martin, we got the Labrador flag and Labrador coat of arms. They were created around the time in the 1970s. Eventually we got the tartan and all this. But these identity things, you know, may simple. They're drawings, pictures on a screen. But for Labradorians, it's so much more. It's about unification. It's about all regions of Labradorian getting together, accepting and working together and pulling together for a single cause. And that's what the New Labrador Party did. It united a whole region of people together for one cause. And the cause was their home, Labrador. And it worked. And it worked very efficiently. Unfortunately, there was a few hiccups along the way. Unfortunately, it didn't last as long as everyone imagined it would. But it set the bedrock, a foundation of what we do today, and how we do it today, and how we approach things today. So you have to give them that much. It was a small movement, you know, burned hot, died off quickly, but it got the job done. And that's something we can all be proud of. And you look at the efforts of Tom, you look at the efforts of Mike, all the volunteers, all the candidates, all the supporters, all the contributors. It was all Labrador getting together and pushing and pulling for one cause, and that was their home. And the Labrador identity we know today was here all along. It just needed a Labradorian from Labrador show it to the world. And that's how I feel about it. That it was there, but you just needed the right people, everyone uniting to just bring it forward, breaking it out of its shell, and showing it and making it work for Labrador. Thank you.